"Daddy, why is she sleeping here?" The question hung in the crisp Christmas Eve air, delicate as the snowflakes drifting from the sky. New York sparkled with holiday magic, golden lights reflecting on ice-slicked streets, carolers singing softly in the distance, and shop windows decorated with snowmen, reindeer, and strings of twinkling bulbs. Families bustled past, scarves tucked tight, laughter echoing off the walls of brownstones. But for 4-year-old Kelly, the city's magic had taken a back seat to curiosity and concern. Michael Carter guided her gently through the snow, holding her small, mittened hand. Their black Range Rover had pulled up just a few blocks from the Rockefeller Christmas tree, and he had stepped out first, tall and composed, his overcoat brushing against the perfectly tailored navy suit beneath. Kelly bounded down into the soft snow, her curls bouncing like sunlight on water. "Stay close, sweetheart," Michael said quietly, adjusting her white knit hat. "We'll see the big tree, then head home for Coco." Okay, Daddy," Kelly chirped, her voice full of excitement. She gripped his hand tightly, her tiny fingers leaving traces of warmth in his palm. Despite the festive lights, Michael's wide eyes were distant. Christmas Eve had always carried a quiet ache for him. It had been 2 long years since he lost his wife, and though he smiled for Kelly, the emptiness inside never quite faded. The twinkle of city lights and the cheer surrounding them could not fill that hollow space. They walked slowly past glowing storefronts. Kelly chattered endlessly about Santa, how many cookies they should leave by the fireplace, and whether the reindeer would like carrots or apples. Then, without warning, she stopped. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Daddy, why is that lady sleeping there?" Michael followed her gaze. At the edge of the bus stop, beneath the flickering sign, a young woman was curled up on the bench. Snow clung to her tangled blonde hair. Her pale sweater barely covered her arms, which trembled as she clutched a tiny bundle close to her chest. Michael squinted. The infant in her arms lay still, wrapped in a fraying blanket, his cheeks red from the biting cold. Tiny fingers poked out, shivering. Instinct told Michael to keep walking. Strangers like this existed everywhere, stories he could not fix. But Kelly tugged harder at his hand, urgency written plainly in her eyes. "Daddy, she has a baby. He's so little. He's cold." Her words pierced through his hesitation. He looked down at her earnest face, saw the concern in every line, and something shifted inside him. Without a word, he untangled the scarf from around Kelly's neck. She watched, silently as he stepped toward the sleeping woman. Kneeling beside the bench, Michael gently laid the scarf over the infant. The baby stirred, lips moving weakly in sleep. Michael glanced at the young woman. Her skin was pale, almost blue at the lips. Even unconscious, her body curled instinctively over her child. "Miss," he said softly, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You can't stay out here tonight." There was no response. Michael leaned closer, urgency in his voice. "Please, wake up." A gust of icy wind cut across them, sending a shiver through his spine. From a distance, faint carolers sang Silent Night. Yet the moment felt anything but peaceful. Kelly stood beside him, eyes wide, watching. That simple trust was enough. "You're coming with us," he whispered, a firmness settling in his tone. Whether he was convincing her or himself, he did not know. Grace Miller awoke with a jolt. The cold hit her first, sharp and unrelenting, followed by panic. She clutched the baby tighter, heart racing. Her back ached from the frozen bench. She blinked against the falling snow, and then she saw him, a tall man kneeling beside her, exuding calm authority, dressed in a tailored coat and leather gloves, holding her son. "No!" she gasped, lunging forward. "Give him back!" Michael didn't flinch. His voice remained steady, low. "Hayes is freezing. You need to come inside." "I don't need your pity," Grace spat, fear and defiance warring in her tone. Michael studied her carefully. She was young, barely 20. Frost and snow had settled in her hair, lips cracked and pale. Her sweater hung thin on her frame. And yet, her eyes burned with exhaustion, defiance, and a fierce love for the small life in her arms. The baby coughed softly, weakly. Michael adjusted the scarf, now wrapped snugly around the infant, and held him closer. "I'm not offering pity. I'm offering warmth." Grace's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. "People only help when they want something. I've learned that the hard way." Another gust of wind cut through the street. The baby let out another tiny cough. Michael held him tighter, firm. "Come or not, but I'm not leaving him to freeze." For a moment, Grace wavered. Her body ached to protect him, to snatch him, back and run. But something in the man's eyes held her. Calm, kind, a quiet strength she hadn't expected. She took a tentative step forward. "His name is Noah," she whispered. "I'm Michael," he said. "My car's nearby." She looked at her soaked shoes, then down at her son, wrapped safely in a scarf that wasn't his, held by a stranger. Slowly, her feet carried her forward. Inside the Range Rover, warmth enveloped them. Grace curled up on the back seat, eyes tracing every movement as Michael adjusted Noah's blanket. A little girl peeked over the seat, observing. "She's so young," Grace murmured. "She's 4, Michael corrected gently. "Her name's Kelly." Grace nodded. "She's beautiful." Silence fell. Then Kelly asked softly, "What's your baby's name?" "Noah," Grace said quietly. Kelly's eyes sparkled. "He's really tiny, like a snowflake." Michael glanced in the rearview mirror. Grace stared out the window, trying to keep her tears hidden. She had once believed in fairy tales, before life had taught her harsh lessons, before the promises, the mistakes, and the sudden absence of family and support, before homelessness became a necessity to survive. As the car glided through the snow-covered streets, Grace finally spoke. "Why did you stop?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He thought of Kelly that first night after the accident, the hollow silence in the house for 2 years, the grief he couldn't shake. Finally, he said softly, "Someone once told me, if you can help and don't, it's the same as walking away." Grace looked at him. His presence commanded respect, yet it was his voice, gentle, steady, that made her trust him. She glanced at Noah, sleeping safely, wrapped in a scarf, held by a man she didn't know. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest loosened. She leaned back against the seat, arms folded over her lap, still holding the imaginary warmth of her son. Michael caught her reflection in the mirror. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened. For the first time in 2 years, Christmas Eve felt different. The elevator doors opened to reveal the top floor of a Manhattan high-rise. Grace had never seen anything like it. Warm, golden light spilled across polished hardwood floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking snowy skyline. A towering Christmas tree, adorned with gold and red ornaments, stood proudly in the corner. She gasped. Michael carried Noah inside. Kelly skipped ahead, excitement radiating. "Come on! This is your room, baby!" Noah lay in a small, soft bassinet near the corner, unused since Kelly had been a baby but spotless. Grace lingered in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're safe here," Michael said gently. "Take the room. Rest. We'll talk in the morning." Grace nodded slightly. Once he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat. Slowly, she laid Noah in the bassinet, one hand resting lightly on his chest. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in weeks, she slept without keeping one eye open. The next morning, Grace rose early. She found the laundry room by accident and washed Noah's blanket and her sweater, still smelling faintly of the street. Then, in the kitchen, She wiped the spotless counters and made a simple breakfast, eggs and toast. She was rinsing the dishes when Michael walked in, still in his robe. "You're up early," he said, surprised. Grace shrugged lightly. "I work for what I use always." He looked at her for a moment. There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet dignity. "I'll make the coffee," he said. Later that morning, Mrs. Margaret Hill arrived. She had worked for the Carters for over a decade. Practical, sharp, loyal. She immediately noticed the extra dish in the sink, unfamiliar footprints, and the faint scent of baby powder. She found Michael in his study. "Sir," she said quietly, "we have a guest." Michael nodded. "Her name is Grace. She and her baby will be here for a while." Margaret frowned. "You do not know her. What if she's just after your money? It happens, especially to men like you." Michael closed his book. She was sleeping at a bus stop with her infant. "I don't think this is a scam." Margaret hesitated. Even so, kindness should be measured, especially with Kelly in the house. Neither noticed Grace standing in the hallway holding a clean towel. She had heard everything. Without a word, she turned back into the guest room and quietly began packing. She dressed Noah with shaking hands, folding the blanket, pressing it close around him. "Let's go, baby," she whispered. "Before we wear out the welcome?" She opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. Kelly came running, nearly knocking her off balance as she wrapped her arms around Grace's legs. "Please don't go," she cried. Mommy said, "Helping others is the best gift. You and Noah are our gift." Grace froze. Then came footsteps. She looked up to see Michael standing at the end of the hallway, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. He had heard everything. Margaret's doubt, Grace's quiet retreat, Kelly's pleading, and in that moment he was back in a hospital room 2 years ago, holding his wife's hand as she whispered, "Be kind, Michael, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He swallowed, his voice soft. "You're not using us, Grace. You're doing everything but that." She stood still, arms wrapped around her child. Michael stepped forward. "Please stay." The days after Christmas passed gently, wrapped in soft music and firelight, the kind of warmth Grace hadn't known in a long time. She spent her mornings in the sunroom, a quiet space with tall windows and a snow-dusted view of Central Park. Michael had once used it as a reading nook, but it quickly became Grace's studio. In a forgotten corner, she found a box of old art supplies, charcoal, sketch pads, brushes. She asked if she could use them. They were my wife's. Michael had said she used to paint here. Kelly joined Grace each morning, dragging her blanket and hot cocoa, plopping beside her with endless requests. "Can you draw a puppy? Can you draw me with wings? Can you draw Daddy with a silly hat?" Grace would laugh and sketch, her hands quick and gentle. "Butone morning?" Kelly sat quietly, hands folded, watching Grace without saying a word. Grace didn't ask why. She just started drawing. That night, Michael came home to Kelly, running into his arms. "Grace made you something," she said proudly, "but you can't see it until after dinner." Later in the sunroom, Grace was tidying up her sketches when Kelly handed Michael a folded piece of paper. He opened it and froze. It was a drawing of him, and Kelly beside the Rockefeller Christmas tree. He was kneeling, tying her shoelace, and Kelly looked up at him with a tiny hand on his shoulder. Warm lights surrounded them like a quiet halo. Michael stared at it for a long time. "I didn't even know you saw that," he murmured. Grace, standing near the window, said softly, "I notice things people forget to see." He looked at her, really looked, and something passed between them, silent, honest, unspoken. 2 nights later, over breakfast, Michael looked up from his coffee. "There's a charity gala this weekend. Would you go with me?" Grace blinked. "Me?" He gave a small smile. You'd be saving me from a lot of awkward conversations. She hesitated. I don't exactly have a dress for something like that. We can take care of that, he said simply. On the night of the event, Grace wore a deep green dress, simple, elegant, her hair curled loosely around her face. The only jewelry she wore was a small silver pendant that Kelly had begged her to borrow. They stepped into the grand ballroom and Grace instantly felt every eye on her. She stayed close to the edge of the room, quiet, observing. Michael introduced her to a few people. She smiled politely, nodded where needed, but mostly kept to herself. Later, standing near the dessert table, she held a glass of wine she hadn't touched when a woman's voice cut through the noise. Well, if it isn't the Christmas charity case turned date, race turned slowly. The woman was tall, polished, someone clearly from Michael's circle. Her smile was syrupy and sharp. I knew I recognized you, she said. You were Theone on 48th and 7th, right? Sleeping on a bench with a baby. Sweet little rags to riches story. Bet it makes for great press. Grace's fingers tightened around her glass, but her face stayed calm. She didn't answer. She simply turned and walked out into the snow. Michael found her minutes later standing beneath a street lamp as snowflakes gathered in her hair. She didn't turn when he approached. You didn't have to come after me, she said, quietly. Yes, I did. He slipped off his coat and wrapped it over her shoulders. You didn't deserve that, he said gently. You never have to explain yourself to anyone. Not anymore. She finally looked at him. Her eyes, so often guarded, were open, soft. And in that moment, Michael wasn't the man who had rescued her. He wasn't a CEO or a millionaire. He was simply someone who saw her, really saw her. And for the first time, she let herself be seen. Thalade. Afternoon sun cast a soft golden light across Central Park, where families strolled through the snow-el paths and children laughed, tossing snowballs beneath bare trees. Grace pushed the stroller slowly, one hand clutching the handle, the other wrapped tightly around her coat. Noah was bundled up and fast asleep, his tiny hat slipping slightly to one side. The soft hum of the city around her felt oddly peaceful until she heard a familiar voice, a voice she hadn't heard since the day she left home. Grace. Her body went cold before she turned. There, standing just off the path near a bench, was her mother. Same pristine posture, same tailored coat, same eyes, sharp, unreadable. Grace's breath, caught in her throat. Her mother took one look at Noah in the stroller, then back at Grace with barely concealed judgment. You should not be here, her mother said flatly. Not in public, not like this. Grace said nothing, her jaw tightening. You chose a shame? Her mother continued, voice like ice. So do not expect love. Then without another word, the woman turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement, disappearing into the crowd. Grace stood frozen, not shocked, not surprised, just hollow. That night, the penthouse was quiet, except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Grace had said little since she returned. She had fed Noah, bathed him, tucked him into bed. Now she sat silently in the corner of the living room, lost in thought. Michael was upstairs finishing a call, but Kelly was still awake playing with crayons and paper near the tree. After a few minutes, Grace heard her voice. Look, Grace, Kelly said proudly. It's your house. Grace looked over. In Kelly's tiny hands was a drawing she had taken from Grace's sketchbook, a watercolor painting Grace had done days earlier, but never showed anyone. In it there was a small, cozy home. Warm light glowed from the windows. Snow covered the roof. In front of the house stood 4 figures. Grace, Michael, Kelly, and baby Noah, all holding hands beneath a tall Christmas tree strung with golden lights. Kelly pointed at each figure in turn. That's me, that's baby Noah, That's Daddy, and that's you." She smiled up at Grace, completely certain. "This is our family now, right?" Grace didn't speak. Her throat burned. Her chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with pain, at least not the kind she was used to. She crossed the room slowly and knelt beside Kelly, pulling her and the drawing into her arms. She held Kelly tightly, her hand shaking as she brushed a kiss across the child's forehead. Then she reached out and pulled Noah's blanket from the stroller, nearby hugging both children close, her heart overflowing. And for the first time she cried, not from rejection, not from loneliness, but because in that quiet room filled with warmth and firelight, she finally felt like she belonged. She wasn't alone anymore. A few moments later, Michael stepped into the room. He stopped when he saw her on the floor, holding both children, her shoulders trembling in silence. The painting lay beside her, and the firelight shimmered against the tears on her cheeks. He walked over slowly, crouched down, and rested a hand gently over hers. "You've carried the world on your shoulders," he said softly. "Let someone carry you now." Grace looked up at him, eyes red, cheeks wet, but smiling for the first time through the pain. And in that single moment, something shifted between them. Not pity, not rescue, but recognition of two people who had known loss, who had learned to live with it, and who, for the first time in a long time, didn't have to do it alone. The storm rolled in fast that night. Snow swirled outside the penthouse windows, blanketing the city in white silence. Inside, the fireplace flickered warmly, but the peace didn't last. It started with a soft whimper. Grace rushed to the nursery where Noah lay restless, his tiny arms twitching under the blanket. His cheeks were flushed a deep, alarming red, and sweat clung to his hairline. When she touched his forehead, her heart dropped. He was burning up. "Noah," she whispered, lifting him into her arms. His body was hot, too hot. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. "Noah, baby, look at me!" Panic set in. She grabbed the thermometer, fumbled it into place. 104.2. DFF. She gasped, pressing him closer to her chest. "Michael!" she shouted, her voice cracking. He appeared in seconds, still buttoning the cuff of his dress shirt. He had been getting ready for a midnight video call, something high stakes with investors in Tokyo, but the look on Grace's face stopped him cold. "She's burning up," she said, her voice shaking. "He won't wake up, Michael. I don't know what to do." Michael took one look at Noah's limp frame and didn't ask. Another question. 10 minutes later, the Range Rover tore through the snowy streets of Manhattan, tires crunching over slush and ice. Michael's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Grace sat in the back, cradling Noah, whispering his name over and over, as if the sound of her voice could anchor him to this world. "Please, baby, please stay with me." Kelly had stayed behind with Margaret. Michael hadn't even bothered to explain the canceled meeting. He had simply tossed his phone aside and said, "Tell them I'm not coming. My family needs me." The hospital waiting room was cold and too bright. The receptionist spoke in hushed tones. A nurse whisked Noah from Grace's arms, while another guided them toward a curtained room. Grace followed, dazed, until her knees buckled into the nearest chair. Michael remained standing, watching through the glass pane in the door as the pediatric team hovered over the tiny crib. And then he heard a soft breath beside him. Grace had fallen asleep, her head tilted to the side, dark circles under her eyes. Exhaustion had finally won. Michael turned. He reached into his coat and gently placed it over her shoulders. Then, with the softest touch, he pushed a lock of hair behind her ear. She stirred but did not wake. He knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he whispered, "and so is he." He turned back toward the window, staring at the tiny boy now wrapped in medical blankets an oxygen mask gently placed over his nose. Michael walked into the room, pulled up a stool, and sat beside the crib. The machines beeped steadily. Noah looked even smaller now, his hand barely the size of Michael's thumb. Michael reached out and took the baby's hand in his own. It fit perfectly. He sat like that for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stayed, holding on, as if by sheer presence alone he could anchor Noah back to health. Not once did he think about the meeting he had missed. Not once did he regret it. Because in that moment, it didn't matter if Noah was his by blood. What mattered was that he was his by choice. Hours passed. The no outside continued to fall in thick silence. Grace stirred awake, eyes fluttering open to the sterile lights above her. She looked around in a daze and then spotted them. Michael, asleep now, sitting in the hard plastic chair beside Noah's bed, his head resting against the wall, one arm still draped protectively over the crib. She covered her mouth with one hand, the tears coming fast and quiet. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time since Noah was born, someone had stayed. The days after Noah's fever broke felt like waking from a long, dark dream. He was back to his babbling, smiling self, and Grace barely let him out of her arms. Relief slowly replaced fear. The hospital stay had shaken her, but something deeper had stayed with her. Michael had stayed without question or hesitation. That kind of loyalty was something she had never known. One crisp morning, as the snow outside began to melt into slush, Grace stood in the kitchen making coffee. Her voice was calm. But sure, I should start looking for work. Michael looked up. You don't have to rush. I want to, she replied. I need to earn my way. He nodded, recognizing something in her tone, a quiet strength. Grace didn't survive by depending. She survived by standing. He didn't press further, but something in his mind had already shifted. 2 weeks later, he took her to a small art gallery, tucked between shops on the Upper East Side. The sign above the door read Miller & Co. Art Studio. She starred. Miller? She asked softly. Just go in, he said with a small smile. Inside, golden lights bathed the walls. Jazz music played low, and every piece of art hanging inside was hers. Sketches, watercolors, studies of thespidy and people. And there, under a spotlight, was the painting of Michael tying Kelly's shoelace beneath the Christmas tree. I don't understand, Grace whispered. I remembered something you said, Michael replied. That you didn't just want to paint. You wanted to share what you see. So I bought this place. It's yours. Her voice trembled. Michael, I can't accept this. You already did, he said gently. Every time you picked up a pencil, every time you saw what others missed, people began arriving. Friends, locals, supporters, champagne glasses clinked. Grace stood near the corner, overwhelmed, her heart racing. Then Michael stepped forward to address the room. The crowd hushed. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began. It's not every day we get to witness something as rare as this, not just talent, but true heart. He turned to Grace. This is Grace Miller, the artist, the mother, and the woman who reminded me what love really is. The silence that followed was complete. Grace stood still, tears welling. She had never been seen this way, not as someone to fix, not as a charity case, but as someone worthy. Slowly, applause spread across the room, growing louder. Grace felt something rise inside her, break loose from years of being unseen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, not from shame, but from recognition and belonging. Later that night, long after the guests had gone, Grace stood in the gallery alone, gazing at her painting. Michael stepped quietly beside her. I meant every word, he said. She turned to him, heart full. He stepped closer. You gave even when you had nothing. You made a home for your son. You reminded me what it means to feel. That's not something people just do." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why me?" He smiled, warm and steady. "Because you never asked Toby, Scene, but you let me see you anyway." And this time, when she leaned into him, it wasn't with fear. It was with love. It was with trust. It was home. The snow fell lightly like confetti from the clouds, dusting the trees and hedges of the garden in a gentle shimmer of white. It was Christmas Day, exactly 1 year since that night at the bus stop, and everything had changed. The backyard of the Carter home had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Twinkling lights lined the wooden fence, and a fire pit crackled softly nearby. A long table was set with art supplies, brushes, palettes, paints, and thick paper. Kelly had insisted that this Christmas, instead of gifts, they would all paint memories, so that was what they were doing. Michael sat beside Grace on the bench, a warm plaid blanket thrown over their laps. Noah, now just over 1 year old, sat nestled between them, giggling as he smeared blue paint across his little fingers. Kelly stood at the table, tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on drawing a house with 4 stick figures under a Christmas tree. One taller, one with curls, one with a ponytail, and one very small with a big smile. Grace glanced at her daughter's work, a soft laugh slipping from her lips. "You're getting really good, you know." "I learned from the best," Kelly said proudly without even looking up. Grace smiled, her cheeks flushed pink in the winter air, her golden hair catching the last rays of the afternoon sun. The light danced around her, making her look like something out of the very stories she used to only dream about. Michael turned to look at her, and for a moment he forgot everything else. The business meetings, the losses, the years of loneliness. All he could see was this: Grace radiant with joy, Noah safe and warm in his arms, Kelly laughing under the sky. The kind of peace that doesn't come from perfection, but from healing. Then Kelly's voice broke through the quiet. "Daddy." Michael looked up. "Are we family now?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Soft, simple, Butte echoing so much more than it seemed. He looked at Grace, at Noah, at the little girl who had asked that question once before, long ago, pointing at a stranger, on a bench and unknowingly changing all their lives. He pulled them all closer, Grace against his side, Noah cradled to his chest, Kelly wrapping her arms around them. He smiled, voice steady and full. "Forever, sweetheart. Forever." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the snowy yard, the 4 of them stayed close, brushes in hand, hearts in sync. There had once been 4 broken pieces, scattered in different places across the city. A grieving man, a lost young woman, a motherless child, and a baby born into uncertainty. But somehow, by grace or fate, or something in between, those pieces had found one another, and now they fit perfectly. Together they painted a picture of home. Sometimes the most unexpected moments lead us to the people who were meant to change our lives. Michael, Grace, Kelly, and little Noah weren't perfect, but together they found something far more powerful than perfection: belonging, love, and healing. This Christmas, may we all remember that kindness is never wasted, and that sometimes a single act of compassion can build an entire family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you true tales and heartwarming fiction that heal, inspire, and remind us what really matters. Until next time, take care and keep your heart open. Subscribe now to Soul-Stirring Stories for more stories that touch the soul.